Hey everyone, I'm Paul, and today I'll show you how to replace the drive belt and variator on a 150cc GY6 engine Chinese scooter. This scooter has more than 8,000 miles on it, so the variator is more than just worn out, it's broken. The drive belt is located behind the CVT cover. CVT stands for Continuously Variable Transmission. The cover is held on by a bunch of small bolts. All the bolts are the same, except the two in the back that are longer. Sometimes these covers get stuck, so I'll get a little help from my sledgehammer and flathead screwdriver. A few gentle taps in the right places, and a little bit of prying, and the cover is off. Inside the CVT, the engine turns the variator and drive face in the front, and the belt drives the pulley in the back. When the engine spins fast enough, the clutch engages and drives the wheel. It's a good idea to keep the bolts organized, but if you lose track of them, it's not a big deal. The two in the back are long, the rest are the same. Let's inspect this belt. Here you can see some cracks, so we definitely need a new belt. It also has some glazing, and there's this weird wear line. What size is this belt? There might have been some numbers here, but they've worn off. I can't tell by looking at it. I'll have to measure this belt. Next step, take the variator off. I got this variator holder tool from rollingwrenchdenver.com. It's not very expensive, and it makes working on these scooters a lot easier. Totally worth it. Remove the nut from the variator and the washer. This outer piece is called the drive face. It's splined to the crankshaft of the engine and is always turning. Now we can take the belt off. I'll set that aside for now. Let's keep going. The CVT cover has a gasket behind it. This isn't a sealed area, so it's okay to just remove the gasket. On some scooters, the clearances are really tight, and removing the gasket can make the cover rub on some of the components. I've never had that problem with Chinese scooters. I don't care about these gaskets, they just get in the way. This is the variator. Put a couple fingers behind it and pinch the variator together while you remove it. Let's inspect this thing. This is looking really strange. See how the bushing wobbles back and forth like that? That's definitely bad. The bushing is made of steel and doesn't look too bad, but the hole in the aluminum variator has severe uneven wear. The belt has been riding funny. It's been going up and down, like this. Wow, definitely needs to be replaced. Let's take a look in here. And we can see it's broken. That would explain the rattling. Here we have two of the three plastic variator bushings. I don't know where the third one went. Let's take a look at the variator rollers. Oh my goodness, look at these rollers. That one is totally broken. The outer layer has come off. Here we have another one that is just completely torn up, so I definitely need a new variator and rollers. This one just has flat spots. Typically, you'll see stuff like this. I've never actually seen rollers completely destroyed like that. That's impressive. And inside the variator, you can see some crazy wear marks where the rollers go. In the center, the circle has turned into an oval, and there's some stuff built up here. This is definitely the worst variator I've seen. That whole thing needs to be replaced. This right here comes off the crankshaft in the engine. And it looks like, even though we had all this weird wear, there is no damage to this shaft. This is the kickstart assembly. This scooter was missing the kickstart lever, so I'm just going to remove this because if you have a good battery, the electric start on these scooters is actually very reliable. When you push the kickstart lever down, the first gear turns counterclockwise. It drives the second gear the opposite direction, and it also moves outward to engage with the crankshaft gear. Then the engine turns toward the front of the scooter. All these moving parts are rusty and don't work very well. I'm going to simplify this scooter by removing all the kickstart gears. I won't have a backup way to start the engine, so I'll have to be slightly more organized and make sure I have a good battery and the charging system works. If you do this, remember to remove this bushing, otherwise it will fall out and rattle around in the CVT and it could destroy your belt. This part back here is called the clutch bell, because it rings like a bell. But not right now. I'm using the holder tool from Rolling Wrench and taking the nut off the clutch now. Normally the clutch bell pulls off, but this one is stuck. Notice this spins independently, and when it goes fast enough, The clutch engages, and this is the part that is splined to the wheel. Let's pull that off and inspect it. It actually looks pretty good. How about that? It's nice and smooth. There's a little bit of a groove right here, but no glazing or hot spots. Let's look at the pads on the clutch. They look good too. There's plenty of material left, there's no scoring, and it looks like this clutch is in pretty good shape. I'm pulling against the contra spring that keeps pressure on the belt, and it feels smooth and doesn't get stuck. It needed a little help from the sledgehammer, but came off okay for me. Here we have some needle bearings that roll here on this shaft, and this drives the rear wheel. This is the drain plug for the gear oil, and this is the fill plug. It takes 0.12 liters of 75W90 gear oil, and you fill the oil to this level, just enough to submerge the gears inside. Here we have a seal to keep the gear oil in, and this is the vent tube that allows the final drive to breathe and equalize with atmospheric pressure. To measure the belt, I put a mark here, then roll it along a ruler until I hit the mark again. This measurement needs to be in millimeters. I'm in the US, so my big ruler is in inches. Anyway, it's 832 millimeters. The width of my belt is 18 millimeters. The final measurement is the angle of the V in the V belt. Using my protractor, I'm getting 105 degrees from horizontal. The angle of the belt is measured by the inside angle of the triangle formed by the grooves in the belt. A horizontal line is 180 degrees, so the other side from where I measured is 75 degrees. Triangles add up to 180 degrees, so I have a 30-degree belt because math. Okay, so that's kind of a weird size, but there are plenty of 835, 20, 30 belts available. That's what I'll get. It's time to start putting things back together. Add a thin layer of grease to the rear spindle and make sure to add some to the needle bearings. The clutch is ready to go back in. I want to clean up the clutch bell a little bit, so I installed a bolt and a nut so I can spin it with my drill. I used coarse sandpaper to resurface the part where the clutch engages. That's much better. Reinstall the washer and add some Loctite to the threads. Reinstall the nut and use the rolling wrench CVT holder tool. Torque the nut to 36 foot-pounds. I ordered a stock replacement variator from partsforscooters.com. You can get a performance variator and tune the transmission for maximum speed and acceleration if you want, but I'm just going with the cheapest parts for now. Let's add it to the parts list. The Variator kit comes with rollers and a drive face, and it's only $35. Changing the Variator takes about an hour. The CVT holding tool from Rolling Wrench will make the job much easier. This Variator comes with the stock weight 13-gram rollers. As the engine spins faster, the rollers are pulled outward by centrifugal force. The weight of the roller determines at what RPM the roller moves. Lighter rollers exert less force on the ramps in the Variator, so the CVT will shift into a higher gear ratio at a higher RPM. That means your engine turns faster most of the time, and you generally get better acceleration. Heavier rollers shift sooner and keep your engine RPMs lower, and usually this gives you slower acceleration. I don't want any oil on the belt, so I'm cleaning the Variator and drive face with alcohol. Apply a thin coat of grease to the crankshaft, but be careful not to overdo it. Too much grease can fly out and it will get on the belt. Pinch the Variator so it doesn't fall apart and slide it on. The Variator bushing must stay clean with no grease. Don't go cheap on the belt. You can get a no-name Chinese belt for $15, but it will get shredded in 2,000 miles or less, leaving you stranded somewhere and having to rebuild your CVT again. Spending $37 gets you a good quality Bando Kevlar belt that will go 5,000 miles without falling apart. It will probably outlast that cheap Variator I bought. Let's add the drive belt to the parts list. My scooter has 10-inch wheels, but with really big tires, so it has a long case just like the 12-inch wheel scooters. 835, 20, 30 is a common belt size for 150cc scooters. Install the belt over the clutch pulley first and jam it in there a bit to free up some slack at the front of the belt. The front of the belt sits on the Variator bushing, then the drive face splines onto the shaft. Push the belt forward so it rides higher on the drive face, then push the drive face all the way on. Add Loctite, install the washer, and the nut. Use the CVT holder tool to keep the engine from turning and torque the Variator nut to the same 36 foot-pounds as the clutch in the back. Move the belt forward to make sure it isn't pinched between the Variator and drive face. Let's test the CVT. The belt is always turning when the engine is running. On idle, the belt turns, but the clutch should not engage yet. You can tune what RPM the clutch engages by changing the clutch springs. Stiffer clutch springs will make the clutch engage later when the engine is revved up higher. This gives you better acceleration off the line, but is less smooth because the scooter jumps when the clutch engages. The belt starts out riding low on the front pulley and high on the rear. That's a low gear ratio. As the engine speeds up, the Variator rollers move outward due to their weight, and the belt is pinched up front, making it ride higher on the pulley. When the engine slows down, the belt goes back to a lower gear ratio. The belt should be able to move all the way up on both pulleys. If it doesn't, the belt may be too short. If the belt is too long, it will be loose and ride too high on the pulleys or slip. The CVT looks good for now, so I'll reinstall the cover. There are 2 dowel pins that help align the bolt holes. The pins can stick to the case or the cover, or they might fall out. It's much easier to install without the kickstart. In case you mixed up the bolts, the 2 longer ones go into the back of the transmission cover. They are M6 by 1.0 by 65mm length. There should be 8 smaller bolts. They are all 40mm long. Install all your bolts and start turning them by hand before you get the tools out. This bolt by the starter also holds the rear brake cable bracket. Once you've started all the bolts by hand, you can use a torque wrench, but I don't recommend doing it this way. My torque wrench is too big for these bolts, and even though it's capable of measuring from 5 to 100 foot-pounds, it may not be as accurate at the lower end of its range, and it's easy to over-tighten or break the bolts. A better way to do this is just tighten the bolts by hand with a small 1/4-inch drive ratchet. Thanks for watching, and remember to check out my Chinese scooter playlist for more repair videos.